My view of the world has changed a lot. I've kind of developed a lot more understanding of people, which is both good and bad, in my mind. It kind of keeps me wanting to stay away from people that I don't want to say I don't like, but just don't have any reason to want to associate with and keep my circle small. It's not really the magical world that you think of as a kid, and when things go wrong, it could really derail your hopes, and it's hard to get back on track. I always thought the world worked for you. Growing up, like I said, I've gotten more cynical and find that it works against you if you let it. I was an only child, but I had a great childhood with my parents. They were the greatest. They adopted me from birth. Being an only child, they gave me everything I could possibly ask for. They were fairly strict. I grew up Catholic. Every birthday was a big deal, and Christmas was a big deal for me, and I really did have a great upbringing. My dad went to all my baseball games, no matter where they were. They both showed up. I was really heavily into playing soccer and baseball, from about 6 on. That was a big deal for us, sports. My dad took me to Angel games, Rams games, Laker games. It was a lot of fun to live in Orange County and be able to have access to so much. I took for granted. I thought every kid grew up, go to LA and go to shows and stuff. I would say my favorite childhood memory is definitely my first Angels game with my dad. Nolan Ryan pitched, and I was a little kid, and I couldn't believe that a guy could throw a baseball that hard. And that was just a fun thing for me, my mom and dad to go to. We went to a lot of games, but my very first one was so memorable because of who it was, and it was a big deal for me to go watch them, and I could never understand how anybody could hit. The guy seemed to throw so dang hard. That was definitely my favorite memory of it. I wish it was one of his no-hitters, but it was, and they didn't even win the game, but it was still something to see Nolan Ryan pitch for the Angels. I was fairly comfortable just being by myself all the time, reading comics, watching sports with my dad, watching horror movies scary movies from the time I was a kid. Around my teenage years is when I kind of drifted away from my faith. Like I said, I was kind of sheltered a lot, and I wanted to just go live, and I didn't want to be forced to do anything anymore. I was addicted to methamphetamine, which I started using in college to keep my weight down, was the excuse I used. I had never smoked pot, wasn't a drinker, really. I used for about a year, and then I met Mark, the guy who would end up becoming my crime partner. And what we would do is go smash windows at computer stores and steal the equipment real quick, smash and grab and leave. And we did that unsuccessfully because we didn't know what we were picking up. So we would start going in the daytime, and he would go inside the store, look around for the most expensive equipment so that we wouldn't spend a lot of time in there. Yeah, so on the morning of the crime, my friend Mark contacted me saying he wanted to go do a burglary. I was coming down off meth and didn't have anything, so I relented to it, and we did our usual thing. We went there that day, and he was supposed to go find out. That's when they first introduced the Pentium processor in computers. Everything before that was 286, 386, 486. Then they created this much faster. We knew we could get a lot of money for it. We went there that day. He was in the store. He went in by himself. That's usually what we did. He would just find out where it is. And so I agreed to do that. I went to pick him up at the motel where he was staying because he was on the run. And we went, drove to the store. Mark went in. That's what our thing was. He would find out where the best thing was. And he took a long time to come out. And I was sitting in the car. We took my car. And he kind of lost his mind inside the store, but he came out with the stolen stuff, did a robbery. I drove him away from the crime to the hotel. I didn't accept any of the stuff. He was on the run, so he was staying in a hotel at the same time, but he asked me to help him carry the stuff upstairs. I did that, but I left everything there. And after a while, he was saying a lot of threatening things towards me, so I wouldn't go to the police and stuff, so I just went home. Well, that night when my mom came out and told me she saw Mark on the news shooting someone, I denied it to her. I said, well, I don't know anything about it. You know, I wasn't sure what she saw exactly or how it played out to her, but my first thought was, I don't want them finding out. When my mom said she saw Mark on the news, I was pretty scared. In a lot of fear. I didn't know that a murder had taken place. I never heard a gunshot. I sort of assumed he strong-armed, waved the gun at the guy and took what he wanted and left. I was just scared, and I didn't know what to do. There was just a lot of shock. A lot of disbelief too, because I never heard any gunshot. I wasn't that far away from the store. It was anger mixed with fear of him because he was just not the same person once he got him into my car again. He was really threatening. He was about 6'6". I just hadn't seen that side of him at all, but I was still really angry with him for doing it that way. And at that time, I had thought it was a robbery. After I found out it was a murder, I was in disbelief. I was more angry and even hateful towards him. Because in the moment, I was really, really angry with him. I would have done a lot of things differently, mostly not agreeing to go with him in the first place. Once the crime occurred, there's not really much I could have changed. I didn't know until much later, and by then I never saw Mark again. I've always wished I never would have went, which is still really hard because then I wonder if he would have found somebody else to do it and it would have worked out the same way. I'm just ashamed of what I did. It's been hard to live with for this long. Really sad too, because I didn't see that part of my friend, but when you're kind of close to somebody, you don't see a lot of things that are triggers. You just think they're the certain way. And Mark was mostly a very mellow, quiet person up until that day. I just couldn't see him going in and taking someone's life. And I still hadn't seen the video of what happened inside the store myself. I had a lot of doubt about the situation, and I didn't really know what to do, so I turned myself in. police asked for the whole story, and I had to go through it 3 times on video. And then I told them where I dropped him off. And when they went there, he was still there. But they weren't letting me know anything. Once I told them where he was, they just took me to a holding station in LA County. I sat there for 2 days before I heard from anybody or anything. They let me call my house, and that's when they told me that Mark had killed himself. And I didn't know either. They surrounded him with the SWAT team. His mom tried to talk to him. And they didn't hear from him for a few hours. When they finally busted in, they found him. He had shot himself in the head. If I were to be convicted, I knew I would get life without parole, meaning no hope to ever come home, which is what I ended up getting. Because I had a life sentence, I go to the worst, the maximum security, the hardest places to be in, which is what happened. And I was sent from that reception center to Sacramento to what is called New Folsom. It was built for more hardcore offenders, and it's right next to Old Folsom. You know, that was really the beginning of my prison stay. It was about a year after the crime. When I was sentenced to life without parole, I still had hope, because I know there was an error in the jury instruction right from the gate, because like I said, the felony murder rule is it's like quicksand. It's shifting all the time. I still wasn't very hopeful. I kind of gave up on a normal life and decided I didn't want to die, and I wasn't going to be taken advantage of in prison, so I just changed my mindset that I'm going to do whatever I have to do to survive. At the same time, I was asking God to please direct me through. He always did, man. It always, it's really hard to overcome that kind of hopelessness and think you could live any kind of life, especially then I didn't know what prison would be like. Oh, it's numbing. Really, more than anything, it seems so surreal. I was mostly just concerned for my parents. I felt like I had already been in county jail for quite some time, and I was kind of ready to handle things, better than they could. And it was very hard to turn around and see my parents sobbing in the courtroom, and they kept telling me I couldn't turn around and look at them, and I just kind of was trying to come to grasp with, okay, this is how it's going to be for a long time. I'm going to be told what to do, that I can't see people I love, and they wouldn't let me touch my mom or hug. It was just look straight forward, and they put me in handcuffs, and that was the beginning. I started hearing from Shelley Hall my first year of incarceration. My cousin Denise was going to church with her, and I believe, gosh, I can't even hardly remember, but I believe it worked out was that she told Shelley about me, and Shelley asked if she could write me. And so it was my first year. It was about 1995. when I started writing her. And just right away, she was such a nice person. I didn't feel like she was trying to cram God down my throat in letters or anything. She was just always, she did more, she asked about me. And, you know, it was just how I was doing, how I was feeling. She told me about her family and made me feel like something outside of prison. Her daughter, she would draw me little crayon pictures and send. She would send them in the letters. And she was just a constant throughout, and I got to hear about how, you know, her kids grew up, all the work she was doing in the church, and her husband Richard, and all the great things they were doing in the church, and I always found it so uplifting. I always loved getting those letters because, like I said, my family they're just weren't good at writing. And, you know, I always felt like they were ashamed of me. And you know, here's, you know, a stranger who reached out. And that's the kind of stuff that really, it can keep you going. And what I experienced in county jail, I knew I had to involve myself if I was seen standing around, that I couldn't go to the yard. Got sent to the hole. They didn't really do anything though, because it was so many people. They sent me back out. So when I finally got to the yard, people already kind of had heard about me and knew that at least I was willing to participate. That's it. It was as I was able to do good time, and they put you on a point system. And once your points drop, you know, you drop off points for a good year, like 6 points. It was when I started dropping levels that a little bit more opportunity opened up for me as far as classes and school. My faith, like I said, I kept back and forth. My belief never wavered, but my faith did, if that makes any kind of sense. You're around so much violence and it's so discouraging. I felt like God wasn't there so many different times, not just for me, but for anybody. I started to lose, you know, my belief. But back in the back of my mind, I knew God was looking out for me, or I would have been dead. Basically, it's such a horrible, violent place, and just little things that would happen. I mean, it could have been so much worse for me, but something always happened that was for the better. I think a lot of people struggle with faith that way. Anything good that I felt like happened, it happened because of God, and it probably shouldn't have happened, or, you know, it wouldn't have happened without faith. I would meet the right person at the right time in there to talk to me when I was going to do something stupid. I would be able to talk to somebody who was not feeling fantastic, and they ended up becoming a part of my life. And that did strengthen my faith throughout the process. You know, I had never been into court or anything, so as far as the appeals process goes, from my conviction, I had an attorney file right away an appeal, and it took about 9 months for the first appellate court to hear it, and when they did hear it, they reversed the murder. But even then, I was still skeptical, but hopeful. And then sure enough, 2 years later, the California Supreme Court reinstated the conviction and struck those special circumstances, which reduced my sentence from life without to 25 years to life. When I went to my first prison board hearing at 16 years, it wasn't as a nightmarish as most people's hearings. Even if I didn't go home, I've improved myself as a person over these 3 years, and eventually I'll get there. I'll still, but I was still at 19 years at that point. So I've thought, well, clearly they're not going to give me a date. So when they gave me a parole date, I was, I started crying, and I was just so happy. And the adjustments I've made, there's been so many. I came out full of confidence. Honestly, I thought, I'd been through the worst, and how bad can it be out here in the free world and stuff. But the world it's hard. It's hard to be forced to live I was forced to live in LA County, and it's expensive unless you want to live in the worst of the worst places. Even then, it's hard just being around people constantly. And I came home with a lot of post-traumatic stress that I didn't know how to deal with. I did go to see a psych, and they put me on medication to deal with depression and anxiety, but honestly, it didn't work that well for me for a long time. And now I have this in my system all the time, the antidepressant I was on. I find myself constantly on high alert, and I couldn't focus on what I was doing because people are walking around. And it seems like it's just a lot of ghosts to deal with from being in there, and you can't turn it off.
I met Stan in September of 2014. I was on a dating website and decided one evening that I would look for a date. And I came across Stan, and I thought he was extremely handsome with his bald head, and he looked very nice, so I messaged him.
The thing is, for me, it's the smallest things. I don't need, it's just hard to have money here in California and spending money and things. And the most joy I get is just spending time with her. We don't have to be doing anything or, sitting watching horror movies. She'll sit and watch horror movies with me, boxing, the things I really love that I didn't get to see a lot of. The two things I missed most was being in love and having dogs. I chose to find some hope in everyday life, whether I got out or not. No matter how much I tried to give up on God, I felt like God didn't give up on me. I need to find hope, and I hope whatever I'm telling people, that there is always reason to have hope. From my story, I hope everyone can take away that it's never hopeless, and no matter what's in front of you, you have to find hope, and God will put it there if you look for it. And sometimes He'll put it there mostly when you're not looking for it. It was something I really needed, was to work on myself and find insight into why I became who I was and why I did the things I did. And the biggest thing in my life, because I fail a lot, but I just keep going and keep trying. And every time I fail, I learn something and find a purpose. And the purpose doesn't always have to be about me. It could be about other people. And that really kept me going and kept me from giving up.